Shalom, everybody. And is Rabbi Kelman here? No, okay. So no need to introduce myself. This is already our fifth class in the series. And our topic for today, the heading is you don't need religion to be moral, but the advantages of godly morality. There's a couple of very interesting phenomena that I've seen many times, and I imagine many of you as well. Um, that my wife has these non-religious cousins in Tel Aviv, and whenever we get together, almost every time it gets around to his statement, her first cousin, he says, "Well, I can be a good and moral person without being religious." As if the whole goal of religion is to be moral, which is definitely a very important point. And the question is, how to approach that. Now, if you go into a Baal Tshuva yeshiva, a Haredi Baal Tshuva yeshiva, from experiences of my students, usually they very often try and keep things simple. There's black and there's white, where the religious world is good and the non-religious world is bad, and the secular world is bad and stay away. And there's a tendency among many Baalei Tshuva, those who become religious somewhere along the line, to regret their previous life. And I know in Israel, some of them stop going to the army to do reserve service, and many go to the extreme. And this is connected with a very simplistic way, which often works with children, and often it is presented to Baalei Tshuva in order to keep things simple. If you want to be religious, leave everything, and there's no such thing as secular morality, etc. Rav Kook does not go in this direction whatsoever. And by the way, this is not the first time that we're seeing that Rav Kook is significantly different than that which is accepted in the Haredi world, simply because he sees the necessity of returning to authentic Judaism and leaving the exile Judaism. And that way, it can be that much more appealing. Not only is it true, but it's that much more appealing to the non religious, especially those who have rebelled against Torah. So Rav Kook is going to say that secular morality is very good. It's fantastic. Nevertheless, there are advantages of godly morality. Rav Kook doesn't talk about religious morality. In general, he doesn't talk too much about religion because, as we learned together, Rav Kook says the goal of Torah is to be godly. Sound familiar? The goal is not to be quote unquote religious, the goal is to be godly. But there are advantages in godly morality. But let us start with the share screen in source number 6. In source number 6, this is from Orot HaKodesh, Rav Kook's work on philosophy. And the beginning of the third volume is called Musar HaKodesh, the Holy Morality. And it starts out as follows. Meleim anu regesh musar. We, all of us, Jew, Gentile, religious, non-religious, man, women, every person has a feeling for morality. Everybody yearns to live a life of purity. Our imagination excites us for the desire to imagine the purest and the most idealistic, the most moral world. Whenever I read this, I remember, I think most of the people here remember John Lennon from the Beatles. And after the Beatles broke up, I think it might have been his very first album, he put out a cover song called Imagine, where he writes about imagine a world without religions, imagine a world without countries, a socialistic dream. Maybe we'll talk about it that next time when we talk about Rav Kook and globalization. But John Lennon, was not religious, and he dreams of a moral world of peace and love. And that's natural, and that's good, and that is secular morality, which is fantastic. Hakefetz hapnimi, our inner desire. Now, when Rav Kook writes there is an inner desire, that infers that there is also an outer desire, right? Every person has an inner desire and an outer desire. The students of Rav Soloveitchik are familiar with the term haratzon elyon v'haratzon tachton, a higher desire, it works out in English, and lower desire. Whereas our higher desire, in the world or in the words of Rav Kook, our inner desire is wants peace, wants love, wants morality, wants a beautiful world. The problem is we also have an exterior desire, where very often, if the doctor tells me, you have to cut down and eat less pizza if you want to live a long life. So he's showing me that I have to decide between two types of pleasure. Pizza is a short-term pleasure. Long life is a long-term pleasure. And usually the inner desire goes for the long-term pleasure. And that is more mature. As we've seen in the past, Rav Kook always writes about the maturing of the individual, the micro, and also the maturing of mankind, with ups and downs, obviously, on the way, but the general direction is up. And so a child will usually prefer the immediate gratification. He wants all the candy and he wants it now, right? And he doesn't think about diabetes or cavities, right? On the other hand, your higher desire or inner desire is more idealistic, it's more mature. It takes a step back and looks at the broader picture. So achevetz hapnimi, our inner desire, shelanu, of all people, again, religious or not religious, Jew, Gentile, man, women, everybody, we would like our permanent desire and life to be a life of purity and holiness. שתהיה כל מגמת חיינו ברורה ומכוונת לאידיאל היותר נשגב בחיים. We all are idealists. Now, we don't always feel like it being idealists, but that's what we want. And here again, there's a difference between what I want and what I feel like, right? I might feel like staying in bed, but I want greatness. I want to win a Nobel Prize. I want to finish Shas. I want to be idealistic. So that is the higher desire. But just to finish off the point, by the way, it's not the main point, but there is a pyramid. And just like everything in life, there are different classes of pleasure. There's first class pleasure, second class pleasure, third class pleasure, where the Ramchal and Rav Kook goes in this direction, that immediate gratification is third class pleasure. A higher level, second class pleasure, is long-term pleasure. But there is still first class pleasure, and that is even longer than long-term pleasure. That is eternal pleasure. And we in Am Yisrael have a lot of eternal ideals going on, right? We are eternally the chosen people. The land of Israel belongs to us eternally. The Torah is eternal. And so that is the highest level of pleasure for which people are willing to forego third class pleasure and second class pleasure. Paragraph bet, 6 bet. V'chol elu hatshukot einan midgashmot. All of these desires for a good world of love and peace, how are they fulfilled? Hi'im al yedei, only through mesirutenu apnimit ve'hachitzona. If our inner desire and our external desire are given over to the light of God, ela musar ha'eloki, to the godly morality. hamitgaleh b'Torah, b'masoret, b'seichel, u'b'yosher. There are four different venues through which the godly morality is revealed. I should get back to the share screen because I made a diagram here. Can you see the diagram, or is it coming out backwards? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we believe that everything begins with God. Everything starts with God. But God runs the world through four venues. And that is what the four that Rav Kook is referring to here. There is the venue of Torah, the venue of tradition. We'll talk soon about what's the difference. The venue of logic, and the venue of conscience. And all four, our conscience gets us to be moral. So does logic. So does tradition, and so does Torah. And the goal of everything is just like everything begins with God, we believe that everything is going to evolve and mature to reach the godly morality and the godly ideal. So, what is the difference between, let's start with secular morality. Notice that the two last on the list in number six, and the right hand points on the chart, conscience. Our conscience, we feel that it's good to be good. We feel good when we do good. We feel bad even when we see somebody do something wrong. That's our conscience. It's also logical to be moral. And again, you don't have to be religious for to have a conscience and to have that logic that if I am good to you, you will be good to me. We should all have a good society. Now, in addition, the Torah gives us many, many mitzvot. About half of the commandments are between man and his fellow man, to return lost objects, to love each other, to not talk bad about each other, not to kill, not to steal, etc., etc. These Torah commandments all get us closer to the godly morality and godly ideals. There's a fourth venue, and that is tradition. What is the difference between Torah and tradition? Well, I'll tell you a story. Maybe I mentioned it once. And my mother had for many years a cleaning lady named Mrs. Moriarty, Hannah Moriarty. And you could tell from her name, Roman Catholic, a religious Roman Catholic. And one day she comes to our house and tells my mother, Mrs. She used to call her Mrs. Congratulate me. My daughter just got engaged. So my mother says, congratulations. Got to say something. So you say, who's the lucky boy? Ever notice that? When somebody's born, you ask, is it a boy or girl? And then if they tell you, hey, I just had a baby girl, then you say Mazal Tov, but you still have to ask another question. So people ask, how much does it weigh? Right? They're like, doesn't really make a difference how much it weighs, but you got to say something. Anyway, my mother says to Mrs. Moriarty, who's the lucky boy? So she answers, oh, you'll like this. He's a nice Jewish boy. So she doesn't think about intermarriage or whatever. My mother asks her, why are you so happy that he's a nice Jewish boy? So Mrs. Moriarty says, what do you mean? Everybody knows that the Jewish boys, they make good husbands. They don't get drunk or curse or beat their wives like the Irish boys. She's Irish, right? Her boys are Irish, but she's happy that her son. Now, her son, I still remember his name was Ken. Ken Moria. No, 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 that's her son. I should say the son-in-law, the future son-in-law, obviously is not religious. Otherwise, he would not be marrying a non-Jew. So, nevertheless, he still has tradition. Even if most of the Jews in America have not been religious already for 2 or 3 generations, there is certain traditions that stay around in Jewish society. And that also gets us to be moral. Now, notice what Kook is saying is that secular morality, not only is it good, it is fantastic. As a matter of fact, it's even godly because secular morality comes from the same address as religious morality. All right. It's the same address, the same God who created, who gave us the Torah and who gave us Jewish traditions. He is the same God who created us with a conscience. He is the same God who created us with logic that is logical to be moral. And if so, Rav Kook says, again, as opposed to the Haredi approach in most of the Baal Tshuva yeshivas, Rav Kook says there is nothing wrong with secular morality. As a matter of fact, it's so good, it's even godly. It's not secular morality. Nevertheless, and that's our topic for today, what are the advantages or benefits of godly morality? So let us get back into our source sheet. Here we go. Source number 6, paragraph Gimel. Here Rav Kook gets into the major question. Hamusar shel chol einenu amot. Secular morality is not deep enough. It doesn't get as deep as when you bring God into the picture. Ve'ino nichnas bepnimiyut haneshama. It doesn't really get into your kishkes 100%. Even though secular morality gets people to be good. Again, God created us with a conscience and logic. So secular morality does get us to be better. But the problem is, אין להדרכה זאת תפיסה עומדת בפני ההסתערות של תאוות שונות. When desires, what's often called the Yetzer Hara, when a person is overcome by super strong desires, you should bring God into the picture. There's a famous quote from Voltaire, who said that even if there was no God, we would have to invent him. And it's a famous quote. And if you think about what is Voltaire saying, the major point, there I could say 3 major points. Number one, it's good to have an ideal power, always to look up to. As Rav Kook writes, there is a constant arrow of improvement. And that arrow, even as the individual or society, mankind improves, there is always more and more room for improvement. That's point number one. Point number 2, and this is really what's more connected with our topic, is if a person does not do wrong because it feels wrong, it feels bad when you do something bad. What happens if sometimes it feels even better to do something wrong? And that's what Rav Kook is referring to. Certain times in life, I'll give an example. Say, today in statistics, everybody who goes to university has to study statistics. And one of the reasons why is because it's important to do skarim, surveys, statistically check things out. Anyway, so you're doing a survey. Question number 1, I want to start out easy, right? Is it good to be moral? You'll have about 99% will tell you, yes, it's good to be moral. Okay. Question number 2, is it moral to cheat on your spouse? Here also, 95% will say, no, it is not moral to cheat on your spouse. Question number 3, and this question was actually asked. I saw this a couple years ago. Do you cheat on your spouse? And according to that survey, they found 60% of American men and 40% of American women admit to cheating on their spouse. Now, if these are the people who admit to cheating on their spouse, you can obviously raise the number when it comes to people who do not admit it, but do it. Now, what happened between the first 2 questions and the third question? if everyone agrees that it's good to be moral and everybody agrees that it's not moral to cheat on your spouse, why are so many people doing it? And the answer is because they are overcome with certain desires, which are even higher than their moral desire. Yeah, it feels wrong to do something wrong, but sometimes it feels even better. And that's where the problem is. And that's where you've got to bring God into the picture. God sees everything, God knows everything. And all those people who think they will not get caught by their spouse, it does make a difference if your spouse catches you or not. There is a God who sees everything, who knows everything. There is a heaven, there is a hell, there is judgment day, there is accountability. And that is the simplest meaning of what Voltaire meant when he said, even if there was no God, we would have to invent him. And because God keeps us on our strongest moral behavior, even when other desires become very, very strong. I'll give an example. Um, Anybody who's married for many years knows that after being married for a long time, there are certain phone conversations that you, even if you don't hear the other side of the conversation, you already know what's going on. Anyway, my wife had this relative, an older lady, who was very, very heavy set, very heavy set. She had a glandular problem. And most people, as soon as they're satisfied, they stop eating. And that gland was not working for her. Anyway, very often the phone would ring and my wife would say, "Oh, hello. How would you like to come for Shabbat?" And this woman, again, without hearing her side of the conversation, she said, "I would love to." And then my wife would say, and then she would ask, "What should I bring?" And my wife would always say, "Just bring yourself. No need to bring anything." And then this woman would say, "I'll bring dessert." And she had a sweet tooth, and she always liked passing by Machane Yehuda. And my children would love meeting her at the bus stop. And she would come with one shopping sal. They have these big shopping, how do you say, sal baskets. One of cookies and cake, and the other with chocolates and candies. And my kids would love to go to the bus and help her carry the all the goodies back. Anyway, one Friday night, as we were eating dessert, and this woman, again, she had a glandular problem. She, especially when it comes to dessert, she just keeps eating and eating and eating. And my kids also, they were really getting into it. They loved her desserts. And then all of a sudden, my wife yells out from the kitchen, "Oi, the cookies are milchig. They're dairy." And we had just eaten meat. And you all know that you're not supposed to eat dairy after eating meat. Now, this woman, I had never seen this before. She pushed away the dairy cookies, and she probably revealed, maybe she even surprised herself, how much self-discipline she has as soon as you bring God into the picture. In other words, there's a big advantage, a moral advantage, to bring God into the picture. And that's what Voltaire said. I'll just mention another point, a very important point, a practical point. Everybody knows that an Orthodox Jew, even if you offer him $1 million, he will not eat an olive size or a spoonful of pig, right? Otherwise, he's not a religious Jew, right? A religious Jew does not sell his values or his ideals or his beliefs for money, even if it's a million, even if it's $10 million. He is not going to eat pig. Now, one of the problems in the yeshiva world, and Rav Kook writes about this, and Baruch Hashem, over the last century, there has been an improvement, gradual evolution, is that if a yeshiva learns just Talmud, Gemara, Talmud, and doesn't learn Musar, doesn't learn morality, the classic works of Mesilat Yesharim, Path for the Just, Derech Hashem, the way of God, the Chavetz Chaim, the laws of Lashon Hara, not speaking bad about other people, Sharei Tshuva, Shmone Prakim of the Rambam, or Musar HaKodesh of Rav Kook. If a person does not learn Musar, he may not realize that pig equals telling the truth. In other words, just like even for $10 million, a religious Jew would not eat pig, so too he will not lie and should not lie, even if you offer $10 million. Now, not all religious Jews are on that level simply because, unfortunately, we speak a lot about eating pig and we don't speak enough about telling the truth. But if a person does learn Musar properly as much as he should, and it registers, it doesn't, if a policeman, stops you and says, hey, do you know how fast you were driving above the speed limit? And the person thinks, hey, if I lie, maybe it will save me my driver's license. And if there's anybody in the world that has that self-discipline to tell the truth, even if it's going to cost him his driver's license or a large fine, it is when you bring God into the picture. So that is the first point. Rav Kook continues. He admits that there definitely are secular people who also have a super strong morality and will not lie, even to save their driver's license, or even if it will save a large fine. But here is point number two. Again, what was point number one? Point number one is that godly morality brings a lot more discipline that you need when strong desires awaken, and it feels even better not to do something right or to do something which is wrong. But point number two is v'kal v'chomer she'ein biyad musar rafui kazeh ladrich et haklalot. The masses are not, you cannot lead the masses to morality without bringing God into the picture. Et hatzibur enoshi bo'omko ve'kef godlo. What is Rav Kook referring to? And this is a very important point. There always was, way before Am Yisrael, way before the Torah was given, there always were righteous individuals. In every generation, you probably remember Chanoch and Metushelach and Shem and Aver. In every generation, there were righteous individuals. You don't need the Torah to produce righteous individuals. All of us know people who, they have good nature, they have good nurture, their parents are moral, their children are moral, their genetics, their education, they will be moral, even super moral, without religion. But that's not enough, because the goal of the Torah is to bring morality and the godly ideals to the masses. And here you have to remember the bell curve. That's the most important thing we remember in statistics. The bell curve, which says that, by the way, my students recently told me that they teach it differently today in universities. When I learned statistics, they said that 75% of people are somewhere in the middle, and you have 12.5% who are extremely musical or extremely smart or extremely artistic or extremely handsome or beautiful. On the other extreme, there is 12.5% who are extremely not musical and not smart and not artistic. And most people, 75%, are in the middle. My students told me recently, they're a lot younger, and they learned in statistics. So they told me, maybe I should check it up afterwards for homework, that 67% of people, of the population on any given topic, are in the middle of the bell, which means that there is, what does that leave? some 17% on this extreme, and another 17% on that extreme. Um, and we want all of Am Yisrael to be moral. And that you can only achieve because individual moral people, there always will be. But we want to bring morality and the godly ideals to the masses. The Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, you'll remember his name, Reb Shneir Zalman of Ladi. It's easy to remember because all the Lubavitcher Rebbe's are Shneir son, Shneir son, Shneir son, Shneir son. But the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was not Shneir son, he was Shneir. So Reb Shneir Zalman of Ladi, he writes that the word tzibur, which is a Hebrew word for community, he suggests that it's also Rashi Tevot, it's also an abbreviation for tzibur tzadikim, beinonim, urishaim. That in every community you have the righteous, you have the middle, and you have the problematic. And again, that's the bell curve. Now, we don't only want all of Am Yisrael, 14 million Jews in the world, to be godly. We also want all of mankind to be godly. And Rav Kook writes about this a lot, that, Jews sometimes tend to forget that 99.8% of the world is Gentile. And God loves them, and he wants them to also be idealistic and be moral. Okay, so for them, it's enough to have the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach, and Am Yisrael is meant to be a light to the nations, and we have 630 mitzvot. But the point is, if we want the world to be a good place, we want there to be peace and love in all of mankind, the only way to do it is by bringing God into the picture. Because again, if point number one is that the godly morality can overcome even the strongest of desires because he sees it all and there's judgment day. The problem, there are individual secular people who may also rise to that level, but that's not enough to bring the godly morality to the masses who are not necessarily so intellectual and not so educated and not so this and not so that. But the only way to bring morality and peace and love to the world is by bringing God into the picture. I live in a yeshuv named Kol Shachar. We have today about 500 families, very large families, about 7 children per family. In other words, we got more than 3,500 children on our yeshuv. There is no crime on our yeshuv. There's no drugs, there's no murder, there's no theft. Why? And it's not just Kol Shachar. Same thing in Beit El, same thing in just about every religious community. And one of the reasons is because religious morality, godly morality, can bring that morality to the masses, even to the less learned and to the less idealistic. If it's the law of the land, if it's the law of the community, and God is in the picture, that's a big advantage. Again, for those who came late, I want to stress that Rav Kook and we are not going in the direction to put down secular morality. Definitely not. Rav Kook says secular morality is fantastic. As a matter of fact, secular morality, that logic and conscience, comes from the same God who gave us the Torah. Nevertheless, our topic is, what are the advantages of religious morality? So that's point number 2. Point number 3, one of the problems with morality is if there is no objective definition. And you could add this to Voltaire's list of, even if there was no God, we would have to invent him. Now, here, it applies more to religious Jews than to religious Christians, for example. The first 2 points, they're applicable to religious Christians as well. But when it comes to a Shulchan Aruch, Christians do not have a Shulchan Aruch to give an objective moral definition. And what happens if there is no objective definition? There's the problem of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that even if you know that something is wrong, the one of somebody who's addicted to smoking, and everyone's telling him you should stop smoking and you'll be sick, and everybody knows it causes cancer today. And but he says, but it helps me relax. Okay. Or sometimes people they believe in equality and they believe not in labeling, but sometimes they themselves will say, but you know what, that group, they annoy me. Right? You ever hear that? So cognitive dissonance, where there is no objective moral code. I'll give you an example. I remember growing up in America, sometimes, you're not supposed to go into a church according to halacha, but you see church scenes on television. Thing was the Little House on the Prairie, if anybody remembers that, where they show a church scene. And what do? They pass around this plate, and people put in charity. And I think they even if you're poor, you're allowed to take from the plate if you need. But one person puts in $1, another person puts in a quarter. Uh, big spender puts in $5. A real tzaddik, he puts in $20. Now, many of you probably know that the halachic obligation of giving charity, the definition of giving charity, is to give 10% of your income. Now, 10% of your income, I don't know what the average salary today is in America. In Israel, the average household, if both the man and a wife, if both of them are working, say they make 20,000 shekel a month, that means that they are giving 2,000 shekel a month to charity. That's not $20. That's not $50. That's not $100. We are talking about unbelievable sums of money that defines what is charity. So this is a big advantage of the godly morality. I'll give another example. My grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, he was the chazan in Jacksonville, Florida. So we spent a lot of summers down south. And anybody who knows the South knows that they're relatively religious Baptists, a lot of Baptists there, and a lot of churchgoers. And if you ask them, you know, is family life important? They will say, definitely. Is modesty, is humility very important? They will say, definitely. But on the other hand, they all walk around, especially the women, in very short shorts and sleeveless. And there is no, where there's no Shulchan Aruch, if there is no halachic definition of what it means to be modest, Caitlin Clark, they say that she's very religious. Or for those who don't know, she's by far the greatest women's basketball player in history by a large margin. And she's a religious Christian, but she spends her life walking around in shorts and sleeveless. And there's again, non-Jews, they do not have a Shulchan Aruch. But one of the advantage of godly morality is that we have definitions what it is to be moral. Even something as returning a lost object. There are so many laws. Anybody who's learned the second chapter of Baba Metzia, Elu Metziot, you could spend an entire year just learning the laws of what is considered a siman, what is considered when you have to return a lost object or not. I think this came up in one of the previous shiurim. Anyway, so that's point number 3. Point number 4, and this is connected with point number 3, is not only, again, what was point number 3, that godly morality in Judaism gives an objective definition, but point number 4 is that it is a super high definition. There is a super high demand that a non-religious, a secular person would never even dream of giving, for example, 10% of his income on a regular basis to charity. Like, who would even think of that? He might be the most immoral person in the world and very generous. And he gives a lot of charity. But in a little house of the prairie, he'll put in a $50. He won't put in 2,000 shekel a year. What is that? That's like a month, $500 a month, right? That is a super high demand. Maybe even a better example. My father, Zichrono Livracha, he was a director of Ulpan Giur, of an Ulpan for converts in Kibbutz Yavne for about 20 years. And whenever I would come for Shabbat, almost every time my father would ask me to teach them some more laws. Now, all of you know that you cannot cover all of the laws, all of the Shulchan Aruch, all the 613 mitzvot, or even half of them, within the scope of a 6 month crash course on Judaism. So, what are you supposed to do? You give them a taste of a little this, a little laws of Shabbat, laws of Kashrut, basic things. So whenever I would come, I would ask. When my father asked me, I said, "Sure." Uh, has anybody learned with them the laws of brachot, of the blessings? So my father said, "Yeah, we learned about the laws of food, blessings on food. But if you want, you could talk about other blessings. You know, there's a blessing when you hear good news, a blessing when you hear bad news, when you have lightning, when you have thunder." But I will never forget what blew them away. And by the way, on in general, converts are very idealistic, very intellectual, and very idealistic. It blew them away when I taught them that we have a blessing that a Jew says, excuse me, when he leaves the bathroom. Asher Yatzar. Thank God. You have to thank God. It's moral to thank anyone. How much more so to thank God? And yeah, that my plumbing, internal plumbing is working, you really have to thank God. Now, again, a non-religious person would never think of such a high definition of morality. The same thing regarding the laws of Lashon Hara. If anybody learned the laws of Lashon Hara, one of the most surprising laws that you're not allowed to slander anybody is it's so surprising that if you ever learned it, you can just nod if you're familiar with this law. It says that if there's a group of people that somebody in the group does not like Reuven, a certain person, then you are not even allowed to praise Reuven in front of this group because you are indirectly causing somebody else to slander him and say something bad. How many of you have heard that? Just by nodding your heads, right? That's one of those laws that it's like so unbelievable that people remember it. Tevra, when I learned this with the potential converts, it blew them away. Who would have thought that of that super high moral demand, not to say something good if somebody, it might cause somebody to say something bad. So again, this is point number 4. Point number 5. Now we're going to go a little quicker because we want to cover 8 points. Point number 5 is let's go to source number 7. Rav Kook's, and by the way, this is not my favorite point. It's an interesting point, but I don't think it's as important as the other points that we're going to talk about. But nevertheless, it's here. Point number 7. This is an Orot HaKodesh, Musar HaKodesh. Rav Kook writes, Hamusar shel kfira eino klum. Atheistic morality cannot be. מפני שהכפירה בעצמה היא הפך הצדק והמוסר היסודי. Because atheism, by definition, is the opposite of justice. Now, if you believe in God, then you would say, yeah, that is wrong. Let's say a person doesn't believe in God. What is the problem? Why is to be an atheist and morality, what is the problem? So apparently what Rav Kook is saying is that I'm sure some of you have heard of Pascal's gambit. Pascal's gambit is sort of also along the lines of Voltaire that we mentioned before, that even if there was no God, we would have to invent him. Pascal says, I'm not sure, even if a person is not sure that there is a God, he has to gamble because there are two possibilities. Either there is a God or there is not a God. Now, nobody knows for sure that there is no God. Nobody ever proved that there is no phallustics. What is a phallustics? I just made up a word. right? So nobody ever, I've never been to Australia. I've never been on the moon. Maybe there are philistics. Maybe there is a God. Maybe there isn't. You cannot prove that something does not exist. Or in the words of our sages in the Talmud, lo ra'inu eno ra'aya. If I did not see something, that doesn't prove it. It might just be that I did not see it. Okay. And anyway, this is so Pascal says that belief in God, or religion, I should say, religion is a gamble. And there are two possibilities. Either I gamble that there is a God, and in the end, after 120, a person gets up to heaven and there is no heaven. There's no judgment. There's no God. There's no hell. There's no. So he wasted some time, right? It's not the end of the world. But the opposite gamble, say a person gambles that there is no God. Again, he's not sure, but he gambles there's no God. And then after 120, turns out that there is a God and there is a judgment day. And he gambled wrong. And he is in hot water, right? So that's what Pascal says. He says nobody can ever prove that there is no God. Maximum, you're not sure, you're not convinced. You know, that after our wedding, we got about a half year after the wedding, all of a sudden, this is before there were cell phones. I came back from yeshiva, and you remember we used to check our phone messages. Kids today, they don't even know what phone messages are about. So I'd come home from yeshiva and I'd check my phone messages, and I got a message from the bank that says to call them as soon as possible. Okay, I called the bank. Remember when people you could call a bank and speak to a person? So anyway, I called the bank and I speak to the teller and I tell him I even knew him. He knew me. He said you left me a message to call. He says, "Yeah, are you expecting 10,000 euros in your bank account?" So I said, "No." He says, "Well, somebody deposited 10,000 euros in your bank account. You should check it out and say thank you to whoever did." But there was no name on it. Well, and I told her about this conversation that we just received 10,000 euro. Uh, for those who don't know, a euro is a lot more than a dollar, and it's more than $10,000. And I said, who could that be? Anyway, to make a long story short, we whittled it down that it is either her uncle Heshi from Tel Aviv, who, Baruch Hashem, is well off, and I don't think he gave us a wedding present, or it is cousin Herbert. She has this cousin Herbert, who was a Holocaust survivor, and he never married and never had children, and he's very, very generous. And hey, anyway, because it was in euro, we gambled to call up cousin Herbert to say thank you. Now, what is the point? The point is that even if you're not sure that it was cousin Herbert who gave us the gift, it is immoral not to say thank you. All right. The Sefer HaChinuch writes, the highest level of morality, we spoke about this once, is altruism, selfless giving. A little lower than that is to give knowing that I will get something in return. Say I give you a birthday gift and know that you will probably give me a birthday gift when my birthday comes around. That's obviously not 100% selfless. A little lower than that is if somebody, say you give me a birthday gift and I am just returning a birthday gift, that's even less altruistic. But the minimum of altruism, writes the Sefer HaChinuch, is at least to say thank you. That's the minimum. You know, we all teach our children to say thank you, and it doesn't even cost you money. And you know what? Even if you're not sure that it was cousin Herbert who gave you the money, better to say thank you to the wrong person and then correct yourself than not to say thank you at all. And even if a person is not sure that there is a God, again, Pascal's gamble. Okay, so you're not sure, but you should definitely say Modeh Ani and thank God for everything he gave you. The health, the sunshine, the state of Israel, whatever, love, whatever it is. Because even if you're not sure that he exists, if he does exist, it is immoral not to say thank you. Okay? So that is point number 5, that atheism is immoral if we don't thank a God who gave us so much. Point number 6 is godly morality has a big advantage in terms of peer pressure. And I have a daughter who did her master's in social work, and I also direct masters, so I helped guide her a little. And I'll never forget her topic was, as a social worker, the profile of people who volunteer, the profile of people who give charity, etc. And I remember she did a survey, and that many surveys have been done before. Anybody wanted to take an educated guess who volunteers more, men or women? What do you say? Educated guess. Women volunteer more, and that's what people usually guess, and they are very, very correct. Another question: who gives more charity, religious people or non-religious people? Obviously, religious people give a lot more charity. Now, this is connected with point number 3, that a religious Jew is not just open up to his imagination. How much should I give? There is a definition. You should be giving 10% of your income, which again is a super high demand. Now, part of this is that if everyone around you is giving 10% to tzedakah, and that's positive peer pressure. And there's a good chance that even somebody who's a miser, he'll also give. Why? Because there's positive peer pressure. In Israel, this is very, very clear. On the yeshuv where I live in Kol Shachar, there's a certain status for boys who go into combat units, and it's even more so commando units. And the more challenging something it is, the more status, and people respect that. Or for girls, most of the girls do Sherut Leumi, national service. The more difficult the challenge, the more status that is. And when an 18-year-old decides what they are going to be doing in the next year or 2 years or 3 years of their life, part of what they take into account is the positive social peer pressure. And if everyone is doing good, and that's what's accepted is to be good, and that's how you found a good spouse is by doing good, then is that much more ingrained. Maybe something, an example which is measurable. I think I brought this example not too long ago. I don't remember if it was here or something. There was actually, here's an article about Israel's religious Zionists lead the world in kidney donations, double the US rate, 5 times Europe rate. And this was actually in the Guinness Book of World Records. I don't know, did anybody hear about this? The Guinness Book of World Records, apparently there are some anti-Semites there. And Israel sent this in, a documented case of how many altruistic kidney donors there are, by far the highest in the world. And Guinness Book of World Records did not want to recognize it. Why? Because Israel is doing genocide, right? Now, even if Israel is doing genocide and you have a moral problem with that, at least give credit that I don't think anybody in the world will deny that being an altruistic kidney donor to a total stranger, that is moral. So at least give more morality credit when Israeli Jews are moral. And in the end, Guinness was convinced. And so today you can find us on the Guinness Book of World Records that Israel is by far the highest rate. How does it work? My older brother donated a kidney to my father, was on dialysis. Then my second brother saw that it's doable, and he did it too. And then I wanted to. Unfortunately, I have diabetes, so I couldn't. But on our yeshuv where I live, a lot of people, every second person that you meet in the shul or in the grocer, yeah, they took a month off and donated a kidney, or they can drink on Yom Kippur because they donated a kidney. That is positive peer pressure, which is found in abundance in religious morality. Point number 7, and now we really have to put on the gas. We only have 5 minutes left. Let us look in source number 8. Rav Kook writes, and hopefully you'll recognize the pasuk, Atzmut hachefetz shel heyot tov lakol. The very desire to want to be good to everything, below shum hagbala ba'olam klal, with no limitations. Bein bekamut anitavin, bein be'echuto shel atov. This is the goal of the godly morality in Am Yisrael. That we don't limit the quantity or the quality of goodness. We want to be good to nature. We want to be good to animals. We want to be good to our parents. We want to be good to Jews. We want to be good to Gentiles. We want to. Now, the question is, how can you orchestrate how to be good to everyone at the same time? Everybody knows that if you are helping your elderly parents, you're not spending that time with your children, and vice versa. And if you're helping your spouse, it's at the expense of your community or of your parents or of your children, right? So, how do you know when to be good and how to be good to everyone? This only a God with a bird's eye view and a detailed Shulchan Aruch tells us. Just one example, we don't have time. Many of you may know that when a person is hungry, nevertheless, we're obligated to give our animals, goldfish, our dog, cat, whatever it is, to give them to eat even before I eat. Right? That's a high level of morality. Where do we learn that from? V'natati esav b'sadcha livhem techa ve'achalta v'savata. The Torah tells us animals eat before people. What about drinking? So the halacha is that if a human being is thirsty, you give the human being before you give the animal. Where do we learn that out? From Rivka. Rivka gives to Eliezer, Avraham's servant, to drink, and then she says, Gamli gmalecha ashkeh, I will give also to your camels. Now, who would have thought of what to give first? To people, to animals, to... That is part of the beauty of the Shulchan Aruch, that God helps us orchestrate how to be good to everything and everyone. Now, the 8th and final point is also connected to this, and that is that there are a lot of ideals aside from morality. Rav Kook has 2 books about the ideals of morality. But what about the ideal of justice, the ideal of truth, the ideal of Am Yisrael? The ideal, there are 13 godly traits, just looking at the godly traits. There are a lot of ideals. And when I showed you that everything begins with God, and that the goal of Torah, tradition, conscience, and logic is to bring us to the godly morality and ideals, morality is not the only ideal. And this is connected with point number 7. How can you orchestrate all of the ideals together? Well, that is what we have the Shulchan Aruch for. That's why we have 613 mitzvot. I'll finish off with an example before I summarize. Many of you remember the uprooting of 10,000 Jews from Gush Katif in Gaza in, what was it, 2003, 2004, I think, about 20 years ago. And
2005.
2005, thank you. And a lot of the yeshivas and the midrashot went down to protest. And for the last 6 weeks of Gush Katif, I went down with my midrasha, and like I said, I think most of the midrashot and yeshivot went down there to try and delay and make it difficult to uproot, because if it's not 10,000 people, but 50,000 people, is that much? Anyway, those of you who remember, there was a big suspicion that there may be a civil war. And there was a Spanish international reporter named Ricardo, still remember his name, a very impressive person. And he was looking for an English speaker, so he gave him an interview. And what he really wanted to know is, what do you say? Is there going to be a civil war or not? I say definitely not. He said, how do you know? He said, the army and the police, they have a lot of weapons. The people who live here, they have a lot of guns and rifles and weapons as well, right? With a license, right? Wherever there's you can't expect to uproot a person from his family and his job and his community and his show all in one day without expecting at least some of the people to protect themselves if they have a gun with a license. And I told Ricardo, you don't understand the people here. He said, tell me about you. So in a nutshell, I explained religious Zionism is that they are religious and they're also nationalist. So he says, oh, sounds like the Hamas or the fanatic Muslims. So I said, not at all. Almost everyone here in our community also goes to university. And also, one of the things that we learn in all of our religious schools is Musar, like I said before, the Silat Yesharim, the laws of Shmirat Halashon. So I said, if this community, yeah, they have a religious fervor and a nationalist fervor, but because we also learn Musar, it's not going to get to a civil war. Anyway, to make a long story short, he asked me a bunch of questions and he says, you know what? I'm a foreign correspondent. I've been around the world. And he tells me, if you people are not willing to open fire against the police and against the soldiers, you are going to lose this battle. There's no way you can win because they'll take you out by force. But he said, but I have no doubt that somewhere along the line, religious Zionists are going to be the people who are running the country of Israel. You'll lose the battle, but you'll probably win the war. And obviously, it's not a war because we're all brothers, but that's what he said. And he said that nowhere else in the world is there a community that has these 4 points and how to orchestrate them and how and when to be religious and how to express your nationalism and how to express your morality and how to express your modernism and how each of them limits and also enhances the others. This is something very, very special. So that is point number 8. Just to quickly review within hopefully 30 seconds. Point number 1, what are the advantages of godly morality? Again, secular morality is great. It's even godly. But nevertheless, there are 8 advantages of godly morality. Number 1, it brings God into the picture. And as Voltaire said, even if there was no God, we would have to invent him. There's discipline. Number 2, godly morality can bring morality to the masses, to the entire bell curve, not just to individually good people. Point number 3, godly morality gives an objective, eternal definition in order to neutralize cognitive dissonance. Point number 4 is not only is the Shulchan Aruch give us a demand, but it is a very high super demand of morality that no secular person would ever dream of not complimenting somebody if there's somebody around who will say something negative about that person. Point number 5 is that atheism itself is a moral problem because even if you're not sure that God exists, he may exist, and it is wrong not to say thank you, which is the minimum of morality. Point number 6 was that religious morality has positive peer pressure. Point number 7 is we need God and we need a Shulchan Aruch to orchestrate how to be good to everyone and everything. Tov Hashem lakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. And the 8th and final point is that we don't only want to orchestrate how to be good to each and every being, we also need to orchestrate all of the godly ideals because morality, yes, it is a very important ideal, one of the most important ideals, but there are other ideals as well, which Torah brings us to ideas like justice and love of Israel and truth and many other points. Morality is not the entire world. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. And if anybody has any comments, we'll open
Just
the
say
floor.
thank you.
All right.
Oh, my pleasure.
When you were talking about teaching the brachot to the gerim, uh,
Yeah.
it reminded me of something that happened to me when I was teaching batch of students. Most of them also were not religious, and
Yeah.
one said, "My father always made fun of me for the bracha sheyatzar."
Mhm.
Until once he had problems, physical
Oh,
problems, and he learned to, you know, appreciate that bracha as well. It's something that people don't, they take for granted, and
definitely.
unless it's something that affects them, they don't have appreciation for it.
Right. You don't even think about it. Right. Good point. Thank you. Any other comments or I
Yeah,
always forget how to get into chat here. Are there any
that's
chats?
okay.
Yeah.
I put something in chat.
Yeah.
So, not to be discriminatory, but these work very well with the Dati Leumi community. I'm just thinking of the Haredi community. I mean, what, 2 weeks ago, what happened in B'nai Brak? That's not moral. And there are many, many things that happen sexual assaults, drug dealing, and these are supposedly God fearing people. So, is that
So
because
that's a
Rav
very
Kook
good.
was being idealistic?
So Rav Kook that's a very good point, and Rav Kook actually addresses it, and that's what we mentioned.
Oh,
That
okay.
Rav Kook writes a lot that it's not enough just to learn Talmud, which is what they do in most of the yeshivas in the Haredi
Nachon.
world for sure. If we also have to learn Tanakh, just look at Megillat Esther that we're about to read. How
Mhm.
Mordechai adopted this his niece who nobody she was without a father, without a mother. That is a very moral code. Look at Megillat Ruth. Look at all the mitzvot between man and a fellow man that we mentioned. That's half the Torah. So if a person is just learning how to brush your teeth on Shabbat or how much to pay if my ox scores your cow, right, then he really might miss the boat. And that really is something that there are Haredi yeshivot who learn more. There are those that learn less. Rav Kook says we should be learning the broad Torah, which is not just Talmud, but it includes also self-improvement, Musar and Pirkei Avot, and
Nachon.
for sure, that's a very important thing.
Metzlichkeit. Metzlichkeit. Super
Menschlichkeit, that's the
important.
word, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Good class. Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. My pleasure. Okay. Any other comments? If you put something on chat, maybe just mention it now orally because I have a problem getting into chat.
I
I know
just
chat is
I
a
just I just put into the chat a recent article by Dennis Prager where he writes about he says my goal is not to convince you that God exists, but I'm asking you to live as if you believe God exists, and by
mhm,
extension, as if you believe objective good and evil exist.
very nice. That's Dennis Prager.
Yes,
So he probably quotes Voltaire. He's a very intelligent person and very well-rounded, I would imagine. But okay, I'll check it out. Thank you. What's the name of the article?
the name of the article is "Right and Wrong Are Not a Matter of Personal Opinion," and I included the link as well.
Fantastic. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you very much. Wonderful share.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And next week is Purim, correct? Next week is, yeah, next week is Purim night. So there's not going to be a class next week. So the final and sixth class of the series is going to be in 2 weeks. That is Kaf Adar, the 9th of March, a week after Purim. Okay. So it's glad I remember that. I'm sure Rabbi Kelman and Torah in Motion will probably send out a reminder, but we'll already bring that up. Okay, be well and have a happy Purim, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Shalom,
Wonderful,
shalom.
wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Glad you enjoyed.